Welcome to a new episode of the Erasing Shame podcast, where we are encouraging Christian Asian mental health. I'm your co-host, DJ Chuang, and my special guest today is Phyllis Myung. She is the next Gen Pastor at Great Road Church in the Boston, Massachusetts area. And I got to meet her this past April in Atlanta, and we just hit it off really well and have a lot to talk about. And we have a limited time, and this is the end of September, which is National Suicide Prevention Month. And as we got to talking, this is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts, and we are caringly concerned for others who may struggle with suicide. So this is a content warning and trigger warning to those of you watching and listening that we will be talking about suicidal ideation on this episode as we wrap up this month of September. So as a part of encouraging Christian Asian mental health, we want to make it safer and learn how to talk about these uncomfortable subjects, because we need to talk about them, because if we suppress them, that doesn't help anybody, and it kind of eats us up on the inside. And we know that from lived experience, my own experience, and that Phyllis will be sharing a bit of her. But Phyllis, tell us a bit more about who you are and where you are in life these days.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, DJ. I really appreciate it, and I'm really excited to be here. I've been living here in Boston probably for about 20 years and working currently as a pastor at a local church outside of Boston. And I actually grew up on the West Coast. So I think I'm still a West Coast girl at heart to some extent. The oceans and the mountains of the West Coast call me, but I think this, like the temperament, I'm more definitely East Coast. And so I've definitely found a home here, especially here in Boston. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is children, family, youth. So anything next gen related, and also mental health and racial justice. And especially in the Asian American world, mental health just has a huge stigma. And so I'm so glad that you're doing this podcast and that we're talking about this today.
Yeah. And tell us about your family situation. You're married. Do you have kids?
Yeah, I have a husband and I have one child and a dog. And so the three of us, or I guess the four of us, live here in Boston. Yeah.
See, that's a tell if you count it as four. If you have one of those stickers on the back of your cars with the little dog in the family.
She is our other child. Yes, our dog is our other child. Yeah.
Now, what's the difference between East Coast and West Coast from your perspective? Because I grew up in the East Coast in Virginia. I'm a Hokie from Virginia Tech. Spent the last, first 45 years of my life on the East Coast. And I've only been out here in California for 10. And the main thing for me is, like, because I do a lot of consulting and travel around the country when I used to do church consulting, America's just America. It's basically franchised. And the main difference that stood out to me here in California is no seasons. So I lost track of time.
Yeah. Well,
I know people talk a lot about differences. Yeah. So
I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. And so it was a little different. We did have seasons, but they weren't like remarkable seasons. So it wasn't until I went out east for college where I experienced distinct seasons, which was really strange for me. And so when I went back home, in the winter time, it would just be kind of rainy all the time because it's the Pacific Northwest. And I just had never noticed how much it rained until I had moved away. And I also think the other difference for me is the way people are kind of wired. And I'll say this only for New England, because I don't think I experienced this like below, let's say, like Maryland and South. But I think there's the intensity of people in the Northeast that isn't there in the Pacific Northwest, or maybe just in the West Coast in general. And I think I felt very intense as like a high school student, growing up in the Pacific Northwest when everybody else seemed very chill. And when I came here to, the Northeast, definitely I felt like a chill person
Mm,
compared to everybody else. And so I felt like I fit in better in that way. And I just feel like the more west you go, the more chill and relaxed you get. And then,
okay.
yeah. And so when I went back to the Pacific Northwest after college, my friends who had experienced me in high school just say, "Wow, you're so much more relaxed, Phyllis." And I just thought that was funny because I was like, I don't think I've really changed that much, but it's interesting that they experienced me that way after I had experienced some people who were, just I think way more intense than I was. So I think
Okay.
that's the big difference. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I hear stories about that, but thanks for taking a minute to unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe it's my own self-perception. I'm just anxious everywhere, so I'm always feeling inferior, and people, people scare me sometimes. So,
People are scary wherever we go, but you're right. You're right.
well, with the time we have, one thing as we get to talk in person and online on the phone every couple weeks. Um, uh, I know you think about a lot of things, and that's why I enjoyed talking with you. As I think a lot about a lot of
Yeah.
things, but one thing that really caught my attention recently was you mentioned you have a lived experience with suicidal ideation, and or actually
Yeah.
attempted suicide.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think about the topic a lot because had to struggle with my own, or I still do struggle with my own depression and suicidal ideation, but I never
Yeah.
got to the point of attempting. And I
Yeah.
think if we're going to make some further progress in understanding how to prevent suicide, there's some insights and wisdom in those who actually got to the point of attempting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first time that I ever thought about suicide was probably when I was in high school in ninth grade. Things were just
Mm,
tough at home. And I just remember writing a letter. And I was also
mm,
kind of, I had been going to church for my whole life, but it
mm-hmm,
wasn't until I was in ninth grade that I really kind of embraced faith for myself.
mm-hmm,
And so I just remember writing a letter to God and just feeling I was feeling just a lot of pressure. There's a tendency in me to be perfectionist, and I'm
mm,
also, if you do Enneagram 2, and I just really felt like responsible for a lot of people around me and taking care of them, and I felt like I was doing a bad job,
mm-hmm,
um and so I just felt a lot of pressure. And I just remember writing a letter to God and praying and crying one night and just saying to God, like, my family, this world would just be so much better without me. And that was the first time I ever
mm,
thought about suicide. And, I think it was really, if you believe in God and God's grace, that God really put somebody in my life at that moment to kind of help me wrestle not only just with my faith, but also um, just my own mental health struggles, without me ever talking about it, but it just kind of happened that way. And so I had a mentor who used to come from our youth group at church and would just mentor myself and my brother. And
mm,
I got through high school that way and I went to college and I felt I was okay, but I knew deep down somewhere that I needed a lot more help than just that. And I probably needed to see a therapist. I knew that I was probably depressed, but I also had these, strange attitudes of, or not strange, I don't want to call it strange. I just had these ingrained attitudes that, as a Christian, you're not supposed to have mental health problems, and that as a Christian, you're supposed to take care of those things like by praying to God, being more
mm-hmm,
faithful,
mm-hmm,
repenting of your sins, that kind of stuff. I think attitudes that just got ingrained without me even realizing it. And growing up in a Korean American family, I think, we also just didn't have the language for mental health issues at all, or what depression
Right.
was, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't learn even what the Korean word for depression was until I was an adult. And so I just thought that just doesn't exist as a Korean. I got through college okay. And, I had some difficult times in college, but it wasn't until after I graduated that I became really severely depressed. And
Mm.
it was the first time that I was having migraines. And so
Oh, wow.
I just took like almost the entire bottle of my migraine medication. And then I had to go to the
Mm-hmm.
hospital. Luckily,
Mm-hmm.
somebody found me,
Mm-hmm.
took me to the hospital. And that was the first time that I, attempted suicide. And I really, I just really wanted to die because I think the pain it was just so overwhelming and it was just too much and nothing was taking it away. And you know, I was trying so hard to be a good Christian and so hard to
Mm-hmm.
be faithful and just felt like I was failing in that. Um, I just felt like I didn't know what I was doing with my life. I had just graduated college and, tried my hand at relationships that weren't really working also. Like, I just felt like my friendships were falling apart. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I felt like dying was going to be a relief somehow. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
how I truly felt. And
Mm-hmm.
so I just remember the next day, um, I had to do the charcoal thing and everything.
Mm.
And
Describe what that
just
charcoal thing is.
so it's just the charcoal, they make you drink this charcoal drink if they don't pump your stomach to absorb any
Wow.
poisons and things like that to try to get that
Wow.
out of your system
Okay.
as fast as possible. And
Mm-hmm.
so that is not a tasty drink. I hope
Mm-hmm.
nobody ever has to experience that.
Mm-hmm.
But, and then they put me literally in a padded room.
Wow.
And I'm sitting
Mm.
in this room and it's padded. And I'd never been in such a place. And I just remember sitting there with the psychiatrist or psychologist or whoever, the doctor who was in that room with
Mm-hmm.
me. And she was just asking me these questions. And I just said, yeah, I need help. I think I knew that I needed help and I didn't know how to get it. And I was just like, I don't know what to do, but I think I need help. And so, she asked me, she's like, well, there's medications that we can try, antidepressants and therapy. And I was like, okay. Um, and then she left. And then, one of the pastors at my church at the time came in and, because this happened while I was living out here in the East Coast. My parents were out in the West Coast. And so, um, she came in and she sat down with me and she just said to me, do you want to still be here with the crazy people? Um, and I just was so shocked that she said that
Mm-hmm.
because in my heart, I was like, I am one of those crazy people. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
need this. I have to be here. Um, and I just remember shaking my head and, she was just saying, like, why don't you just come home? You can stay at my place and, we'll figure this out. We'll
Mm-hmm.
pray and we'll do all this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left the hospital under her care. And I, I remember I got to her place and then I refused to talk to her because I was so angry at her because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I was, she was not going to actually help me. Um, and so then she told me, I could go back to my house. So I went back to my apartment, and my mom came out and,
Mm-hmm.
um, just, I don't know. Koreans, we just don't talk about it. So
Mm-hmm.
she came, she fed me, she's
Mm-hmm.
like, let's go. And we went and visited some family in another state. And, we
Mm-hmm.
just didn't really talk about it. And then we just kind of left it at that. And I was doing a little better. Um, and then it wasn't until after I got married that I probably had my second suicidal attempt.
Oh, wow.
And it was just a really stressful situation,
Mm-hmm.
being like newly married, and it was just really difficult in many, many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but this time I feel like the church that I was, because I had moved by then, I had moved out of that area
Mm-hmm.
and up to Boston. And when the pastor came to see me, he was just like, everyone gets therapy. It's totally a normal thing. And I was like, what? I was like, that's not what my other church said.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah. And, antidepressants can be really helpful if you need it. And, therapy is like a good thing. And you can still be
Mm-hmm.
a Christian and do therapy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that was profound for me, because after that second suicide attempt, that's when I started seeing a therapist. I was on some antidepressants.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that those are the things that saved my life and helped
Mm-hmm.
me to kind of be in the place that I am now. Um, and that, and to not feel so ashamed of having depression, and understanding that it's with me all the time. And
Wow.
so,
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to better identify those times when I know that I could start kind of spiraling down, and know kind of what those triggers might be, um, and be proactive about it instead of just kind of waiting for things to get really bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and to also just know that, I don't know, I think because of my own personal experience, being able to talk to other people who have gone through that, and just to help them and to normalize kind of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, therapy, medication, that those are just normal things. They're not,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't reflect in any way on you as a Christian, and so forth. And that hopefully has helped other people around me that have been going through that, and that I can just sit with them in that, and help them to find therapists, and help them to understand that if one therapist isn't working out, they can go to a different therapist, and that you got to give medication in a certain amount of time. And um that, I think the biggest thing is that, like, your life is worth living,
Yes.
and that it won't always be like that, and you won't
Yes.
always feel that way.
Yes.
And so, yes, this is like a really
Wow.
personal, and it's close to my heart, because I don't, I think about the students that I work with, and
Mm-hmm.
I think about the pressures that they have, and kind of
Mm-hmm.
those things, and how it can, yeah, it can put them in a state where it seems really overwhelming and impossible. And to
Yes.
let them know that they are loved, they are so worthy, they're so valuable, and that their life is worth living, and that this world is better because they are here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just want to make that really clear for them,
Yes.
uh, and that somebody is walking there beside them. That there's no
Yes.
shame, there's no stigma, and so I think that's a big driver for me of why I do the work that I do now. And especially in faith communities, I think that's lacking a lot of times. And we want to look a certain way and be a certain way. And when we don't fit that, there's this dissonance that gets created, and then there's kind of no place to go. And I just want to make sure that, you know, people who feel that always have a place to go and a safe place to be. So
Yes.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Well, thank you for going there. I know it brings back a lot of emotions and as you revisit those memories. And my hope is that because you've opened up, it will help other people to open up
yeah.
because
I hope so too.
so much of the struggle is the isolation and feeling like we're all alone and no one will understand and no one will help and
Yep.
other people will reject us and all of that.
Yeah.
Because part of that is true. Some people will reject us and some people will throw more
Yeah.
expectations on us
Right.
and we don't know who to turn to. And it helps to humanize through stories
Hmm.
these resources about mental health that people do hear messaging about. So last night I was at a suicide prevention seminar and it's called QPR. It's intentionally
Mm.
named to be like CPR, a very
Hmm. Hmm.
simple and clear and effective way to help prevent suicide. QPR stands
Yep.
for question, persuade, and refer. And
Hmm.
so the training is about an hour. I'll add a link in the show notes to the QPR
Great.
Institute so that people can learn how to help someone that is in need or in crisis
Yeah.
to ask the questions, not to be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking of hurting yourself?
Yeah.
Um, because the myth is you might inject the idea, but if someone's been thinking about it, it actually brings
Yeah.
relief that someone would
Yeah.
ask. And then persuade is to say anything you can think of that would bring them hope. So for me,
Hmm.
what gave me hope as that were turning points for me in my own struggle with negative thoughts was friends and family and
Hmm.
steak. so
Mm.
so
And steak.
yes, that next steak dinner and dessert gives
Yeah.
me something tangible to look forward to.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a few other things that I won't mention on air in mixed company, but but having a few tangible things helps me to pull forward out of
Yeah.
the overwhelming stresses and emotions of life.
Yeah.
And two thoughts as we wrap up. So having been under such intense emotions that would push you to attempt suicide. Um, were those were those things that you pondered for days on end, or was it just so overwhelming in the moment that you just needed a release? And what would you wish to have had at that time so that you didn't have to go there?
Yeah. I think back a lot to when I was in ninth grade, and I just wish that I had gotten therapy. Like maybe I could have even gone to the school guidance counselor or something to have started in some sort of therapy, because I think I knew I was depressed, but I didn't know how to name it. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have the language for it. And so maybe
Hmm.
this goes back to an education piece. Because you don't really talk about necessarily mental health, in health class or anything like
Hmm.
that, in
Hmm.
school, and definitely not at church. And so, where would a student, where would a high school student even know what to do if they're feeling that way? And I know
Hmm.
that my parents were not equipped with that either. And so, I think about that a lot. And I was like, man, I wish if therapy and mental health care was normalized when I was a high school student. I feel like, you know, what I went through later on could have been possibly prevented. Um, And the thing is that I think the thoughts don't just come all at once and then suddenly it just, turns into this moment where you're like, okay, this is it. But I think it's there and it's just kind of hanging in the back of your head. At least it was for me,
Hmm.
where that was an option, a viable option at some point. And you push it back and you push it back and you're just like, no, no, no. And you try a whole bunch of different things, I think, to make it work. And that's what I did. And then I felt like when I just came to a point where nothing is working, that's when I was just like, okay. And I made a plan and
Mm,
I was like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is what I'm going to do. And it it was just at a point where it was unbearable. And
mhm,
I wish that somebody had reached out in those
mhm,
times where it was clear that I was really, I literally didn't leave my home for a week. I didn't
mm,
go into my job. I just stayed in my room.
mm,
And I just feel like, man, if someone had just knocked on my door and just said, are you doing okay? Like, what's going on? And
mhm,
had maybe asked me, you know, how I was doing. I don't know, maybe things would have turned out differently. I'm not really sure. But there is
mhm,
also
mhm,
for me, because there was so much shame, I was trying really hard to hide how I was really doing.
mm,
And so,
mhm,
I was, yeah, barely kind of getting through life. Um, so I feel like, checking in on people, at least for me, that would have been a huge thing. And so I don't know. I think for me, whenever I see that people are struggling and having a hard time, I try my hardest to make sure that I'm just checking in and
yes,
just asking, do you need help or,
yes,
are you doing okay? Um,
yes,
and not not because I'm afraid something will happen, but I genuinely am concerned because I know that
yes,
I've been there
right,
and I don't know if it's something that only people who are depressed or, who struggle with mental health know. But I don't know. Sometimes you can just kind of tell you're like, oh, I think that person is depressed.
mhm,
Um, and so that's when I'll just straight up just say, are you depressed? And if you're
mhm,
depressed, like, you know, what do you need from me? Do you need me to just sit here and give you
mhm,
a blanket so you can hide under it and I'll just hang out here for a little bit? Or,
mhm,
do you need me to bring you food or do you want me to just force you to go out. I don't know,
mm.
like just kind of different things
Actually, that's very
because
helpful.
everybody's
You
different.
gave yes, and speaking from life experience is actually helpful, um, because just reading those documents with a
Hmm.
whole big list of symptoms and warning signs,
Yeah.
uh, it still leaves, uh, as I read them, it still leaves me stuck with not knowing what to
Hmm.
do.
Hmm.
And what did so well there was, um, rather than, and I'm sensitive to this because I struggle with it, is when someone says, "Hey, just call if you need help." It still
Yeah.
leaves a person struggling. And what you did so
Yeah.
beautifully there was that, would you like me to just sit with you? Would you like me to give you a blanket to hide under? And you gave 3 or 4 specific things that maybe
Yeah.
one of them would click. It's much easier
Hmm.
to do multiple choice tests than fill in the blank.
Oh yes, definitely, especially when you're depressed.
Yes,
Yeah.
so you did that
Di-
beautifully. You used
yeah.
your East Coast savvy to fill that in. And then now on the other side of um, taking good care of yourself and wanting to help others who might struggle, um, what do you what signals do you pick up as a next gen pastor to reach out and to help someone that might be struggling or is struggling with mental health?
um, I try to pay attention to kids who are who are kind of on the fringes or on the edges. Um, and I'm just extra sensitive to them, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to make sure that I have some sort of connection point with
Mm-hmm.
um, all the students
Mm-hmm.
and and the kids, and just as you do that, I think, and as you get to, you develop the relationships with the kids, you kind of can tell when someone's a little off, or it's
Mm-hmm.
not, you feel like, okay, I just need to check in here.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that I am not, I can empathize and sympathize, but I'm not here to actually do anything professionally. But I can connect them with people who can help them professionally. And so I always make sure that, I offer that, because I think sometimes the trap that we can get in as pastors is that we're there to try to solve someone's problem.
Mm-hmm.
And just from my own experience, I just think
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go to school to do that. I'm not professionally trained in that. But there are these wonderful doctors and therapists, social workers who are trained in that and who have put in the hours, and like the clinical hours, and are
Mm-hmm.
trained and are good at that. And so that's, I want to encourage them to do that. But my job is really to destigmatize and I think
Mm-hmm.
normalize um, getting help,
Yes.
um, and using whatever tools that are available to you to get the help that you need.
That's
Um,
great.
because it doesn't have to be like this.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so just kind of, watching the kids and kind of
Mm-hmm.
seeing like their demeanor, and just
Mm-hmm.
checking in during stressful times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, seeing how they're doing, and if I see kind of changes in behavior or even personality and temperament, I just try
Yes.
to check in,
Yes.
to make sure that everything's okay. Because it
That's
might
great.
not be that, it might be something else. So, but it's
Yes.
always worth just asking.
Yes. And I'm gonna key in on the part where you, the two parts you mentioned. One is building those relationships so you get to know them,
Hmm.
because surprisingly, it's not just the marginalized that struggle with mental health. It's
Yeah.
even the high performing ones.
Yes,
That's
definitely.
something will snap, and then you're like, oh, I never saw any warning signs because they hid it
Hmm.
so well, and then
Hmm.
something tragic happens. And secondly, you also mentioned that it is your role to refer and to educate. So, what is it that
Hmm.
you consciously do as a next gen pastor to do that educating and erasing the shame on mental health?
Yeah,
Do you
I
incorporate
talk.
into your teaching, or do you
I
actually have
do. I
seminars?
do.
Okay.
I do. And I'm just pretty. I I'm pretty open, especially to my students and kids. I think
Mm, mhm,
about kind of my own mental health struggles and things like that.
mm,
I
mhm.
have been somewhat open, I think, to the adults of our congregation as well. But I'm probably much more open to our
Okay.
students,
Mhm.
just so that it's normalized, but
Yeah.
also connecting them. Like, for instance, last year, with kids going back with having a whole year of COVID and kind of all these disappointments and the stresses of like going back to school or hybrid school. So we did a whole kind of mental health webinar where we had a
Mm,
couple high school students as well as a licensed therapist come and talk to kids on how to cope, but also some different skills that we can incorporate and practices. Um, and we regularly talk a lot about mindfulness and
mm.
kind of slowing things down, especially in our faith practices,
Good.
to
Good. Good.
yeah, to be able to kind of pay attention to
Mhm,
ourselves and kind of where there's tension in our body, where the breathing might be difficult, or where
mhm.
um, what our body's like actually physically feeling, and then tap into kind of what our emotions and heart and mind is feeling.
Oh, that's good.
um, so that we can, I don't know, so that we know ourselves a little bit better, and so that then we can identify those things a lot easier. So yeah, we try to incorporate all those things. We also, are doing a thing with our senior high students where we're trying to help them figure out their purpose and how God has designed them, and um, kind of going back to that core and what are the things that bring them joy and are important to them, as a way to kind of center themselves in this moment in life when there can be a lot of questions about the future, but to just kind of hang on to that core, and then to kind of go from there and step out from that core of how God has, given them the wonderful things that God has given them, and the talents that God has given them. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Phyllis. The more you talk, the more
Yeah.
I want to talk with you. So, but I know our time is up for this episode. One of these days, I've been dreaming about the popular Joe Rogan Experience podcast, where he
Mhm.
goes for 3 or 4 hours.
Mm. Yeah,
So
we
one
should
of
do
these days,
that.
well, I might take you up on that. But
Yeah.
I, as you close with incorporating the whole life dimension of our faith, that is something that we are just learning to develop in our spiritual formation, particularly as
Yeah.
evangelical and conservatives, because we do so much cognitive
Yep.
teaching,
Yep.
and yet our body is mind, soul, and
Yep.
physical and emotional, and we're just learning how to do that. And by incorporating that, it actually helps to reset our whole body to be healthy, because it's all
Yeah.
connected.
It is.
And I think science is just beginning to discover this concept of cognitive fatigue.
Hmm.
And our bodies are not designed for brain work 8 hours a day or
Yeah.
60 hours a
Yeah.
week. And
Yeah.
that affects our mental health, that affects our
Mhm.
spiritual health. And so we're just venturing a new territory. And I'm so grateful for you, dear sister, to be as a companion on the journey.
Yeah, me too. I'm so grateful for you, DJ. Thanks for doing this.
Look forward to staying connected online and in person. Can't wait to see you again. And thank
All
you,
right.
Erasing
Thanks.
Shame audience, for listening and watching on this episode. We'd love to continue a conversation with you. Drop us a line anytime at erasingshame.com, and subscribe at YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you for tuning in. And in October, next week, we'll be having a month of clergy appreciation and talking with churches and pastors on how they can incorporate more whole life health in their churches and for themselves. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.